because we are Americans. We like quick fixes. Eat this, don't eat that. Really appeals. We can click on that. It's easy to go and say, oh my goodness, it's blueberries they figured out will help us. It's changing from this oil to that oil. It's doing this. Exercise, everyone agrees, is good. And in fact, it is one of the major things you can do to prevent dementia. People who walk 9,500 steps a day reduce their risk of dementia by 50%, according to one large-scale study done through the VA. But you can get a quarter risk reduction by only going 3,800 steps. So somewhere in there is at least a sweet spot for most people. Many people don't even get the 3,800 steps. The food thing, goodness knows, it really bothers me. I look at the ratings of books on Alzheimer's disease. Why are we getting beaten out by books on Alzheimer's diets? It doesn't work. That's the bottom line. It simply doesn't work. If it did, we would have solved this problem years ago.
Hey y'all, it's Kosta. Today I'm here with my guest, Dr. Mitchell Clionsky, board-certified clinical neuropsychologist, clinician, and author. Dr. Clionsky, I think one of the things that makes dementia so terrifying is how misunderstood and complex the symptoms are. In your book, Dementia Prevention, Using Your Head to Save Your Brain, you speak extensively on how the brain functions and how it's affected by the symptoms of dementia. For our listeners who aren't neuropsychologists, what does this mean?
That's a huge question. Let me try to break it down into some smaller parts that I can tackle, because you're right. The brain is the central organ that controls everything from our heart beating, from the breaths that we take, to how we move, our balance, our ability to pay attention, our ability to learn. It controls short-term memory, which is one of the key symptoms when people experience a dementia. It also controls the executive functions, planning, organization, the ability to think ahead and see the larger picture. So you're talking about command and control of the entire body. Now, obviously, this is an area of our body that develops slowly. If you think about an infant, they can't talk, they can't walk, they can't care for themselves. Over the course of growing up, we learn, we develop, we change, we adapt, and we hopefully will then turn into adults who are capable and able to care for ourselves and other people. Unfortunately, as people get older, we begin to lose some size to our brain, as well as some of the connectivity inside the brain. As that happens, we begin to naturally have a little more difficulty in our 50s and 60s, thinking as quickly as we did perhaps in our 20s and 30s, being able to remember as much as we used to when we were younger, but not to the extent that it usually gets in the way of good everyday functioning. And similarly, even into our 70s and 80s, for many people, we're able to do fine. There's some people who are even super agers who maintain the abilities at age 85 to think like they did when they were 55. But for most of us, we lose a few miles per hour off our fastball. Now, what the problem is that a certain percentage of us, anywhere from perhaps 10% in our 60s to 20% of people in our 70s to up to 40% in the 80s and later, have a progressive decline in our thinking that is greater than normal. So when we compare people using standardized tests, which is what I do primarily as a starting point, I compare them with people of their age and background. They don't do as well. And when it gets to be significantly lower than what the average or typical person of their background is able to do, we call it a dementia, a neurodegenerative process, a brain disease in which people lose the abilities they used to have. Well, we use a very wide-ranging battery of tests. When they come in to see me, it's about 3.5 hours. So they get an interview And at the same time, so does a family member or a friend, somebody who really knows them and can talk about things from the outside, because we really want to understand their perspective and also take a good history. We also review their medical records from their primary care and other doctors, so we know what that background is about. And then we give them tests. I tell people we measure how you think. We look at how well you pay attention under different circumstances. We look at how well you're able to learn new things and remember in the short term. That's really one of the key differences. Long-term memory, the old stuff, childhood memories, early adulthood memories, are often very well preserved. People always say, why can that be? That took place so long ago. And I say to them, think about how good your brain was at the time those memories were being made. That's the difference. Now, today, your brain's older, it doesn't have such good connectivity. So you have a harder time remembering. We also look at those executive functions. We look at language and communication. We look at emotional state, because if you're depressed or anxious, you can have problems with memory and attention that can be a lot more easily treated than if they're due to dementia. So we bring them in, we give them a variety of tests, and then we figure out, compared to other people their age, are they normal? Are they slightly or somewhat below where they used to be, which is what we call mild cognitive impairment? Or have they dipped into one of the different types, and there are different types, of dementia? And that's our starting point for crafting a treatment plan.
And we can get in the weeds about all the different types of dementia, but I just want to ask you a very simple question, and then we're going to move on. When you see a lot of individuals and you do these assessments, are you seeing a trend in what type of dementia is coming up? Is it vascular? Is it Lewy bodies? Like what do you see most often when you're assessing patients?
Most often, and this is really a reflection of the field itself, I see a combination of Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. Most people think of Alzheimer's disease as either being the only type of dementia or the most important type or the most severe. So that I'll say to them, well, I think you have a vascular dementia. It's due to your circulation problems, your high blood pressure, the stroke that you had, other kinds of problems. They'll say, oh, thank goodness it's not Alzheimer's. And I'll tell them, no, it's not really any better. It's just a little different.
Right.
But most of them are a combination of several.
So you see a combination. That was kind of the question that I was going to follow up with. So it's not like, okay, if you are diagnosed with dementia, you only get one type of dementia. You can have multiple types, right?
Unfortunately, yes. And the combination, because a lot of the cardiovascular and cerebrovascular problems, in other words, blood circulation problems, will actually cause the buildup of the proteins that we see in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. So one really can feed into the other.
So we're going to talk about how to prevent dementia and all of the different strategies that you write about in your book. So let's get started. Dementia isn't inevitable. And in 1 and 2, it's preventable. Your book lays out a visual model of more than 20 factors that impact dementia risk, including 15 that are adjustable throughout adulthood. Would you tell us about a few of the controllable variables?
Sure. A couple of the most important have to do with midlife cardiovascular diseases: high blood pressure, diabetes, sleep apnea. So these are oftentimes together because they are often found in people who are overweight, who are sedentary and don't get enough exercise. They're really prominent in people who are smokers. So if there's one thing you want to get rid of immediately, it's your cigarette habit, because not only is it the cancer risk, but it's also what it does to your circulation and spiking your blood pressure and shutting down the very tips of your blood vessels that get up into your brain that you want to avoid with cigarette smoking.
And is that just cigarettes or is that nicotine use in general?
That's a really great question because I know a lot of people vape right now. The
Right.
nicotine itself, so for example, a nicotine patch typically does not do this. Vaping, I think vaping is probably only a different flavor of smoking. I really don't think that it was sold to us as, oh, this is better
Right.
and it'll help people quit. And most of the people I see who vape really haven't quit. They're just
Right.
vaping instead of smoking, but it's more acceptable. It doesn't smell quite as bad.
Right.
I don't think it's as good. I don't think it's different in terms of what it does to your cardiovascular system. I'm asking them to work on letting go of that as well and
Okay.
using medications, Nicorette gum, patches to quit, or simply, this is one of the techniques that we've used that's effective for some people. You find people who are smoking like 20 cigarettes a day, and you say to them, okay, here's what I want you to do. Tomorrow, I want you to smoke 20 cigarettes a day. They look at me like, what? I said, yeah, that's fine for that. It's fine for tomorrow. But the next day and for a week, I want you to smoke 19 cigarettes a day. No more, no less. And then the week after that, you're going to work on 18. You will not miss that extra cigarette. In fact, until you get down to 10, you're probably going to not miss it at all. You've already cut your consumption in half. At that point, you take a different strategy. But that's how we get people started, because usually they're waiting for the right time. It doesn't happen usually. And so they keep failing and going back to what they were doing. But anyway, smoking is one of those things. But also the sedentary behavior, uncontrolled sugar levels in their blood. It's a really important thing. People think about diabetes as simply being something that'll get you eventually with, numbness in your feet and blindness and erectile dysfunction. Well, it'll also get your brain not to work as well. And so taking medications is one way of reducing those blood sugar levels. You should be checking your hemoglobin A1C, which is that longer term, not so much what your sugar level is on a Monday or a Tuesday, but rather what the average sugar level is, the percentage of sugar in your blood over 90 days. And you want to get that down really, if you can, into the range of 5.5 to 6.5. What people will call pre-diabetic is actually even a little too high. But you want to get it down with medications, but also most people need to exercise. Most people need to lose weight in order to accomplish that.
Well, and we are going to talk about diet and exercise next, but before we do, when you're naming off these diagnoses and these conditions, I am a stats guy, and I think to myself, almost 50% of the country is obese or at risk of being obese, right?
Yes.
So what does that say to us for people developing? I know that it's not like if you're obese or if you have diabetes, you will get dementia, but there's a pretty good chance that it will develop before end of life, some form of dementia. And there's 100 different diagnoses or types of. So does that concern you that there's going to be a lot of individuals who are diagnosed who are living with dementia?
Absolutely. And even though it's sort of the third rail in healthcare to talk about obesity, because it's sort of like, oh, you're shaming someone, you're making a fool of them, blah, blah, blah. I don't view it that way. What I say to my patients is, you have to have a body that is consistent with what your body was intended to be.
Right.
Because, for example, every extra pound of central adiposity, which means the belly, shows up as a thinner brain surface. There's a relationship between those two that they can see on MRI scans and can associate with this central adiposity. Your body probably wasn't made to carry around that kind of weight. That's also why your knees are hurting you at age 60 or 65. It wasn't just because you were athletic as a child, because maybe you weren't even athletic. It's because for every pound of weight on your middle, you're putting an extra 5 pounds of pressure on your knees. There's a reason your knees hurt. You have to look at what's that doing to things like your breathing ability while you sleep. We know that, especially in younger people, that if you're overweight, your risk of having obstructive sleep apnea, which is basically that you stop breathing multiple times while you're asleep, goes way up because of the additional pressure on your neck and on your belly and your lungs while you're sleeping. As you get older, it becomes less important. Age becomes the important factor there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I talk to people all the time about why their weight is not ideal for them and why it's important for them in a very logical, critical way to start examining, what am I doing that has me at this weight? And what would I need to consider changing in order to alter that? And if you sort of take them under the, over your shoulder and put your arm around them and say, look, here's what we're looking at together here. How do we plot this? What's the reason why is it what you're eating? Is it the amount you're eating? Is it when you're eating it? Is it because you're eating in response to feeling lonely or anxious or whatever? Then you can start to game plan a little bit on strategies for changing. As opposed to most doctors you go to see and they say, hey, you're overweight, lose weight. It's like, thank you. I didn't know I was overweight before I walked in and got on the scale. Never stepped on a scale before.
Right.
Ripped the labels out of my jeans, so I don't know what the number is. Of course you knew.
Yeah.
But that doesn't help. What helps is seeing it in a more logical planning kind of way. So you can try to figure out, what are your triggers? What's causing you? Because nobody really wants to be overweight. I've never met anyone who says, no, leave me alone. I'm real happy being 40, 50 pounds overweight. Nobody is.
So when I think about the usual talking points I hear when it comes to dementia prevention, it mostly is revolving around diet and exercise. Mm-hmm. Why do we focus so heavily on only diet and exercise when there are so many different factors that play into decreasing risks?
Because we are Americans. We like quick fixes. Eat this, don't eat that. Really appeals. We can click on that. It's easy to go and say, oh my goodness, it's blueberries they figured out will help us. It's changing from this oil to that oil. It's doing this. Exercise, everyone agrees, is good. And in fact, it is one of the major things you can do to prevent dementia. People who walk 9,500 steps a day reduce their risk of dementia by 50%, according to one large-scale study done through the VA. But you can get a quarter risk reduction by only going 3,800 steps. So somewhere in there is at least a sweet spot for most people. Many people don't even get the 3,800 steps. The food thing, goodness knows, it really bothers me. I look at the ratings of books on Alzheimer's disease. Why are we getting beaten out by books on Alzheimer's diets? It doesn't work.
Right.
That's the bottom line. It simply doesn't work. If it did, we would have solved this problem years ago. It's the easiest thing to fix.
What is an Alzheimer's diet?
Oh, depending on who you talk to.
Okay.
A lot of them have good things. I mean, nobody thinks that sugar and ultra-processed foods are good for you. So reducing those, we've all known for a long time, you can't live your life at McDonald's,
right?
Basically. And you have to avoid the sugar things because the carbohydrates are putting on the weight, which causes you not to want to exercise, which causes all these other secondary medical problems. So we've sort of known that. But there's always things like, is it a spice? Should we just load up on turmeric, on curcumin? Should we load up on dark leafy vegetables and berries? Should we have olive oil rather than butter? Should we have ketone?
Fish instead of chicken?
Fish instead of beef. Chicken instead of beef. Plant-based versus, you'd want to name it. It's sort of like, okay, let's start a restaurant chain called the Dementia Prevention Restaurant.
So how do you feel about people that take like the newest craze is taking like Ozempic and Mounjaro, which is a diabetes medication to help lose weight.
Those are very effective for a lot of people, and they really can make a difference. I've seen several of my patients who have diabetes who have those medications, and they've lost significant weight in a reasonable period of time. That's, within a couple months, they've lost, 10% of their body weight. And I say to them, how do you feel? And they say, this is great. I actually have, for the first time in my life, not felt constantly hungry.
Wow.
And that's an experience that probably neither one of us have ever had. We finished a meal, and maybe even 2/3 of the way through it said, I'm really full. I may eat a little more. I may nibble a little bit just because it's really good. But we don't walk around after the first meal saying, okay, what's the next thing I can eat?
Sure.
That's how the brain is for someone who has that problem. That's a medical problem. Mm-hmm. And these people do, in most cases, really well and will continue to do well in those medications. I mean, they have their side effects. There's some gastroparesis, some problems with the some cases, extreme cases, paralysis of the stomach muscles. But for most people, it simply slows the way in which food passes through the digestive system. They feel full. They're not out there, eating constantly. And if they pair it with some behavioral changes, increase their exercise, really work on portion control, I think they're going to do great. I think it's a real boon. Now,
that's awesome.
I don't think, and partly, it also works for people who don't have diabetes. And that's why it's hard to get those medications sometimes.
Right. Right. And especially, and I'll even take it a step further. People that are younger, that haven't been diagnosed with diabetes, but that may very well be either pre-diabetic, or they may already have diabetes, just not been diagnosed with it. Mm-hmm. This is a great way, in my opinion, to reduce their overall weight and be able to escape having that diagnosis of diabetes and, a potential future of having dementia. So.
Yeah, no, it could be a very good thing. And there's some even more effective medications in the pipeline. So
wow.
This
That's
is something
great.
Which is expanding.
So they are finally taking this problem seriously.
Oh, yes.
Is what you're saying. Okay, good. Thank goodness. It's about time. It's always fascinated me.
We've taken it serious in the past, but always viewed it as a behavioral problem as opposed to a medical condition.
Yeah.
And I think that there are probably different variants. I think for some people, it is a behavioral problem. They eat because they're emotionally upset.
Sure.
They eat because it makes them feel good in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Other people, I really do believe it is a medical condition, and those people are going to do really well on something which changes the on-off switch. One of the things that we don't talk about is that there is a balance of these two chemicals in our brain, leptin and ghrelin. Sort of sounds like Hansel and Gretel. But leptin and ghrelin are in a dynamic balance that determines when we burn calories. When we get back to this issue of sleep-disordered breathing, sleep apnea, when people have sleep apnea, the balance of leptin and ghrelin gets thrown off, so we don't burn calories when we should. One of the reasons why it's really healthy for people to treat sleep apnea is it rebalances those chemicals. They're able to lose weight more effectively. Not only do they have more energy for exercise, but the exercise actually works better.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about in the book, I think, is maybe for me the most important thing. It's not just the model, but the interconnectedness of all of these things.
Yeah. So I want to talk about habits, because habits, whether we intend them or not, will shape our lifestyle and life. You've dedicated 3 chapters of the book on how to use proven psychological methods to change your habits and health to alter your brain's future. What do these habits look like for most people?
For most people, it's starting out with the right target. Mm-hmm. By that, I mean you need to target something that's real specific. I face this every year when I talk with people about New Year's resolutions. Oh, I've got a resolution. I'm going to live a healthier life next year. That's a wonderful resolution. What does that mean? I said, what do you mean by that?
Right.
Well, I'm going to eat better. Okay. Like how? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, are you going to, is there something you're just going to stop eating? Is there something you're going to start eating? What are you specifically going to do? Because your general target is like saying, I'm going to take a trip. And I say, where are you going? I say, I'm taking a trip. It doesn't get you there because you don't know where you're going. So the first step to behavior change, first of all, recognizing that we all need to change all the time. Change is an essential for growth. And it's just as important in our midlife. It's even more important as we get to be older because the challenges sometimes are even greater. But in order to adapt, to be healthy, we have to recognize that we're not fully cooked at age 40. We haven't figured it all out by that point. It's okay to make new changes, to try new things, to learn from experience. So I work with people on breaking down general habits, general goals, I should say, into more specifics as a first point. So let's say the target is, I'm going to lose weight. Great. Okay. So let's talk about when you're going to eat, how much you're going to eat. What do you think the impetus is? They say, well, I'm one of these people who snacks. I don't eat anything all day. I eat a big dinner and then I snack all evening. I said, great. Okay, how can we change that? And we start talking about how you no longer allow yourself to eat automatically in front of the television. If you want to eat something, great, but you have to actually get up off of where you're sitting, go into the other room and eat it there. Because right now you're paying attention to what you're doing. Right. Or let's say you want to exercise. One of the things I talk about in the book is my prescription for exercise, which is real simple and real doable. It's a 10-minute brisk walk. That's all. A 10-minute brisk walk. A brisk walk means you're moving fast enough that your heart rate goes up, but not so fast that you can't talk while you're walking.
Okay.
That's brisk. You do it for 10 minutes, 3 times a day. Nice. Here's why this works. Number 1, you don't need special equipment. Number 2, the weather is rarely an inhibitor. It's hardly ever too hot to go for 10 minutes, too cold or too wet. It can be too icy. But other than that, and you can walk inside, it's 10 minutes, so you're not going to probably hurt yourself. You don't need to have anything other than a decent pair of shoes, and you can squeeze it into even the busiest schedule. Now, that 10 minutes 3 times a day adds up to 30 minutes of exercise per day, 210 minutes per week, which is right in the sweet spot recommended by all of the major medical societies. 150 to 300 minutes is the recommended exercise. And here's something also. If you do it at a brisk pace, which I've tried and measured, you'll walk 10 miles a week.
Wow.
See, most people don't start the correct way. They either decide they're going to run a marathon, and within 2 weeks, they're either in bed or in the orthopedist's office, or they've given up.
No, that is a true thing that you are actually, so I resonate with what you're saying because I have a goal right now to run 2,000 miles this year.
Wow.
And I started, so I'm 300 miles away right now. So I started this journey I was 230 pounds. I was working a lot. I wasn't exercising. I've always exercised my whole life, but there was a period in my life where I was just too busy and I was too focused on my career, not enough on myself. And I was able to start running 2 to 3 miles a day. And I set a weekly goal for myself. And so what I would do is I would set it. I think my first goal, gosh, I can't even remember now, but I think it was like 15 miles a week was my goal. And if I'd get too busy, I'd still have to finish all 15 miles. So sometimes I'd get to Saturday and I'd be at like 7 miles. And I'd have to run all 7 in that day. And now I have a relatively high pain tolerance. So luckily I was young, I was late 20s, early 30s. So I didn't have any significant injuries, but I have a friend who him and I are training for an Ironman, and he wasn't exercising much, but he's also not in bad shape. But just going into it too fast, he has a stress fracture in his foot.
Yeah, I'm into the long term for people.
Yeah.
I tell them, I equate this to what I call the bank robber's dilemma. So you're curious about what that is. I love to shock people with free. So bank robber's dilemma. You rob a bank, you get $100,000, but they arrest you. You got the money stashed aside, but now you spend 5 years in prison. So you've made $20,000 a year. Guess what you can do for $20,000 a year? It's a lot easier than being in jail. So the problem with most people starting an exercise program, and it's a wonder at your weight that you didn't hurt yourself, is they go out, they try too much too soon, and they end up in bed or getting some kind of treatment for it. And then they back off and they don't achieve their goal. So I'd rather exercise to 80% of capacity and do it every day than to try to do 110% and end up missing weeks because of injury. Nice. And it's easier to persuade people to start on the smaller scale too.
So with regards to the habits, the diet, the exercise, are there any other thing? Obviously, we talked about smoking earlier. Are there any other things that you touch on, any hot button issues?
Yeah, we look at what people are taking to go to sleep at night. A lot of people out there are taking over-the-counter sleep medications. These almost all contain diphenhydramine, otherwise known as Benadryl. Well, these chemicals deplete the chemical acetylcholine in our brain. We've got 4 medications currently on the market to preserve memory. 3 of them work by helping to preserve acetylcholine. And so you got people taking medications which deprive them of acetylcholine, and that gets in the way of their thinking. Long-term use of benzodiazepines, anxiety medications, also is a cause for depression. So we have to look at what are you taking that you don't think is a big deal, but it actually is.
Yeah. So like if you, for example, take some form of melatonin to fall asleep.
Probably okay.
That's okay. All right.
Melatonin's not one of these. I'm thinking the Tylenol PMs, the Advil PMs, anything ending in a PM. Look at the label, see if it says diphenhydramine. That's probably not your best bet. If you're going to take a melatonin, take it like 3 hours before you want to fall asleep. One of the problems is timing. People wait until they want to fall asleep. It takes a couple hours for that stuff to kick in.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about dementia. In your experience, what are the greatest misconceptions and misunderstandings about dementia, and how does misinformation about the symptoms of dementia derail prevention?
I think one misconception is that it's inevitable. The large-scale research that we now have, that we've cited in our book and talk about, shows that 40 to 60% of dementias can be prevented or avoided. That's a huge number. Do you realize what people would pay to cure dementia in 40 to 60% of the cases?
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
That's outrageous numbers of dollars. And they go to the ends of the earth to do this. So we're saying, why wait? Start before you get there. You may not know you prevented it. You might just think you were lucky. I'm okay with that. I just want to reduce the number of people who get this later on. It's like, the flu shot. Why do you get a flu shot? I got a flu shot last year, and I didn't get the flu. Was it because of the shot, or was I just lucky? Answer, I don't care. I didn't get the flu.
Exactly.
So it's the same kind of thing where we work on all those preventable, and we lay out a bunch of them in the book. So that's one misconception. Another misconception is that dementia is basically a psychological weakness. Well, there are very strong people who get dementia, extremely bright people who get dementia. There's presidents and leaders of countries who have had dementia. It's something which can happen. Some of it is completely unavoidable. We don't make any claims that we're going to fix this for everybody. We're just going to stack the deck in your favor. It's also a very active kind of process. You can't prevent dementia by passively putting your head in the sand, not assessing where you are with your habits, your lifestyle. Here's an example. Hearing loss. We've now discovered over the last couple of years is actually a cause for dementia.
Really?
Yes. We now are able to see through a particular kind of MRI scan called volumetric imaging, a thinning of the surface of the brain in an area called the auditory association cortex. In other words, it's a part of the brain that perceives sound. It's connected with the memory centers, the hippocampus of our brain. So there's a thinning in people who have even subtle hearing loss. The other thing that they very recently discovered is using a technique called functional MRI, that we can see the networks, the connectivity of different parts of our brain. People who have hearing loss have a down regulation of a network called the salience network. Salience means it's important, it's salient. So those people are the ones who are missing the joke, who are not getting, oh, that's interesting, I got to pay attention to that. And the beauty is we can correct this in most cases with hearing aids. But you have to get people to wear them when they get up in the morning, throughout the day, even if they might be spending the day by themselves. Because that background noise that's going on, the fan in the corner, the refrigerator going off and off, the birds chirping, all of that stimulates, pings the auditory centers of our brain and keeps them nourished and stimulated. We want that. So I tell people, don't treat your hearing aids like the crown jewels and bring them out only for state occasions. You want to wear them every day, all day long. And they say, but, I'll feel old if I have hearing aids.
That's right. That's exactly the question I was about to ask you next.
And I say, you know what really makes you look old? They say, what? I say, yeah, exactly. What? Because that's what you're doing when you don't hear well.
Right.
They're so small these days that most of the time you won't even know that someone is wearing them. If you're a woman, it's almost always under your hair. And if it's a guy, step up. It's not a sin. In our generation, my generation, between rock and roll music and environmental noise, the vast majority of us are going to have hearing loss by the time we're 70. So it's a question of, do you treat it or don't you?
So that's the question, I guess, to follow up on is, when you talk to people who are either going to be, well, let's just say not at risk, but who have the early stage symptoms of dementia, and there's these ways of preventing the progression of the disease, but they won't come to terms, or they won't accept the treatment, like wearing hearing aids, or incorporating a form of exercise. Or just, maybe not something that's so laborious, but just something that is going to give them a perspective where they accept that they're going to have to live with this condition, but they can make things in their life optimal so that it doesn't continue to get worse. Do you find that people are receptive to your treatments, to your discussion with them, or do you feel like more people are like, no, I'm fine, I'm going to be okay, and it's not until they're in crisis that they actually are like, oh no, well, I guess I'm not okay?
So I see a special group of people. These are people who've already come in and agreed to be tested. Okay. So they or someone else is concerned. I also, in our testing feedback session, show them a graph comparing their scores. It's a simple bar graph. Each of the different areas we tested, how they stack up based in comparison to what we would expect. And we look at this together, and I tell them what I think is going on. And then I tell them what we can do so that this doesn't get worse, but I'm going to need their help. Usually I tell them, okay, there's things that I'm going to have to get your doctor to do. There's recommendations that are spelled out, but there's things that you're going to need to do if you want to stop this from getting worse. And there's a chance we can get some or all of this better to some degree if we act now.
Wow.
So when they start telling me about why they can't do some of these things, I'm pretty straightforward with them at this point in my life. And I say to them, explain that to your brain. Okay? You say you can't exercise, you can't walk because you got arthritic pain. It hurts. I can tell you that the more you walk, the less it's going to hurt. But explain to your brain, which needs the exercise, why you won't do it.
Yeah.
Explain to your spouse why you want to be dependent on them going forward and potentially one day have them changing your diaper. I'm very straightforward with people.
That's
I say,
good.
we know things. We can fix some of this. We can slow down some of this. It's a heavy lift, though. I need your help. And then I'll typically see them back for reevaluation in 6 months to a year. We see what's happened, what the tests that we've recommended from their doctor come out as. We see how they're doing with their interventions, whether it's a CPAP treatment or cutting down on their alcohol or changing some of their other habits. And then we make a plan from that point to try to improve the situation. Are there some people who don't come back to see me? Absolutely, there are.
Okay. I
can't stop that.
Most of them do come back and they've made some improvements or some lifestyle changes, and then you guys can go on to the next step.
Yeah. They have to understand, I really care about what's going on with them and want to share this information. I can't make them do it, but I can really be persuasive because I got a lot of facts and figures behind me. Yeah. And I also understand resistance. I understand as a psychologist, one of the things you learn about is that if you only had to tell people what to do, it would be easy. People do what they've done for real good reasons. You have to respect that. But you also have to help them to see it from a different perspective.
Well, and that's the whole point of why we created this show, was to have a medium for people to be able to access information that they typically wouldn't find anywhere on the internet, and we've talked about dementia probably more than any other diagnoses, period, because so many people are affected by it. And so many people obviously make the mistake of confusing Alzheimer's and dementia as being the same thing. And, I'll tell you, the conversations that I was having prior to doing this show, I used to kind of beat around the bush a little bit about people who would come and talk to me about long-term care. And, I would try to be like, hey, listen, there's hope and it's going to be okay. And I would kind of just say, like, just don't stress out and put yourself in a compromised position because of a loved one that may or may not have a progression in their chronic illness. I did that for probably 6 years when I first started in this industry. And then what I found out was I was setting them up for failure, because what they needed to be doing was looking at it from a worst case scenario and doing everything in their power to prevent that from happening. And so now I paint the bleakest picture possible so that and give them all the necessary steps that they need to take to ensure that it's not just the person that's suffering from a chronic illness that may end up needing inevitably long-term care before end of life, but so the family and the spouses and the siblings and, gosh, everyone else involved in the care process is on the same page. So
and that works
I resonate
better.
with what you're saying. Yes, it does. It works better. I resonate with what you're saying. A lot of people think that I'm causing fire where there doesn't need to be, but I would much rather do that, and 60% of the people respond and actually go and take the call to action, whereas 100 or 90% of them, based off of my other type of communication, just end up saying, "Oh, good, we're all good. Don't worry about it. Let's move on with our lives." So totally get it. All right. Throughout your career, you've treated thousands of patients with cognitive impairments in decline. What have these practical experiences as a physician taught you about how we live and how we treat our brain?
That if people understand the relationship between lifestyle, taking care of their medical conditions, identifying changes early in the process, we get a lot of good outcomes. Denial is perhaps the biggest problem that people experience because it doesn't prepare them to do anything but worry. And that's not going to make a difference. That's, in fact, probably going to deprive them of changes and activities they can do to make a difference in the future. In fact, one of the reasons we wrote this book was to try to take those thousands of patients. I mean, it was a joint effort. My wife is the lead author, Emily Clionsky, MD. She's a psychiatrist who primarily practices in the world of neurology. She'd also had been an internal medicine doctor before that. So she's pulling together all of the medical information and then adding this to the experience, because we've practiced it side-by-side practices for years, oftentimes seeing the same patient, but not always. And what the things that we've learned from each other are that we've sort of borrowed some of these approaches. And we wanted to, however, get a larger audience, because how many people can you see in the course of a year? I could see about 1,000. She could see a few more because she doesn't see them as long as I do. She's in for shorter visits. But still, to deliver good care, you have a really limited, geographically controlled area. This is too important to have this information just sit there and do it one at a time. We need to see a much larger audience like you bring to this.
Yeah. At the end of the day, are you optimistic about dementia prevention, treatment, and eventually finding a cure? But also, how far away do you think we are from finding a cure to the symptoms of dementia?
I'm very optimistic about dementia prevention. I really do believe in all of this very, very good research that has shown a 50% on average reduction in the number of cases. If we could simply motivate and inspire people to do these things, we would see that result. As for the cure, personally, I think it's going to come from something like genetic splicing, like some of the stuff, CRISPR.
Yeah.
Because the current strategies that they're using to try to get rid of beta amyloid are minimally effective, very expensive. We're going in the wrong direction. We're cleaning up amyloid as a way of trying to treat something which has already happened before that occurred.
So you're like Aduhelm, the medication.
Aduhelm, lecanemab, both of those. Yeah. I am not impressed by their data. I think we've been going down the wrong pathway for 20 years. And because of that, we've lost a lot of time and a lot of money. And it's not going to be coming up with better versions of those medications. We've been very good at clearing out beta amyloid plaques from the brain. Unfortunately, unlike mice, where clearing out the plaques improves their memory, it doesn't do that in people. Why we keep trying to improve on that makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. So the cure is going to come from genetically modifying somebody's DNA so that they do not have dementia later on in life, or is there a way to reverse their decline, or is there a way to reverse their condition by modifying their DNA?
You know something? Above my pay grade.
Okay.
but that's where I think it's going to come. I think it's going to come from something that is, attached to a virus that gets in, that's going to be able to switch us from producing more, amyloid beta 42 to cutting it, splicing it somewhere amyloid beta 40, which is less toxic, or one of those kinds of things.
Sure.
I think that's where it's going to happen.
I listen to, I don't know if you ever listen to Joe Rogan, but I listen to Joe Rogan occasionally when he has certain people on, and he was talking to the guy that created ChatGPT, OpenAI, the CEO, and they talked a lot about kind of the future of the human race, species, and a lot of it was to do with the fact that we have an opportunity, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, so don't worry. But it's just something that's been kind of fascinating me lately. There's an opportunity as we evolve as a species to create an environment within ourselves, to use technology that allows us to modify out genetically or otherwise, some of the diseases that we have. But one thing that I've always been, and you use things like, say, for example, like a Neuralink type of component in your brain to send signals to cure other physical diseases and disabilities. When I think of the future of long-term care and specifically aging, so not even long-term care, but just aging in general, technology is going to play an outsized role because we're just not going to have enough people to meet the demand for all the people that are going to require some kind of service.
In Japan, they're using some robots to care for elderly people who have neurological diseases.
Yeah.
One of my friends said, I don't think I'd want to relate to a robot. I said, really? How about R2-D2? How about C-3PO? Suppose you had a C-3PO with you. Yeah. They said, that wouldn't be bad. I could deal with that. Yeah. Their version of what robotics are like and what they could turn into may be really different. But I think most of us, the Star Wars generation, would be just fine with having one of those units help us to do things.
Well, I'll leave it at this. If you want to know what the future is going to be like, look at the smartest and most creative people. Maybe not the smartest, but the most creative people in the world, the people that make movies. You'll find all the answers there. So we always like to end the show with a call to action. If you could tell our listeners one thing they could do today that would reduce their risk of developing dementia, what would it be?
Go online and buy Dementia Prevention Using Your Head to Save Your Brain. Having said that, the biggest thing I'd get people to do is to go out for a 10-minute walk as a starting point. Exercise is an important substrate for almost everything. And if you can't walk, find out how you can do yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, something else. One of the biggest problems we have is we spend way too much time sitting on our butts. Not enough time getting out and doing things. So other than my tongue-in-cheek advertisement, that's what I'd have them do.